someone asked me this question, is like, what started me on this journey of self-discovery and healing? How did I get to this position where I'm talking about methods of healing and recovery? Well, let's go back in my past a bit, and I'll tell you, kind of how that sprang up. So first of all, I had a very difficult upbringing, two very traumatized parents. My father grew up during World War II in southern England, and anyone that knows anything about history will know that that was an incredibly uncertain time. And I think when the war started, he was about 10 or something like that, 9 or 10 years old. So you can imagine what that was like as an atmosphere. You've got bombs raining down on the country. I'm sure his mother was very nervous about it, and so on. So my father was very challenged from that experience and many others. My mother, her mother died when she was 1 year old. So she didn't get the sort of attention and care she needed to be even a proper mother. And she was also depressive and very self-absorbed. So that's one thing that started me off. And the other thing was that I have certain genetic dispositions that created celiac disease. And I didn't even understand all this at first, so it was very confusing. And in addition to all that, I had a traumatic brain injury when I was 19 years old when I was skiing, and my skis got caught in the snow in a certain way. I got thrown and I landed on my head. Broke my neck. Didn't know that till I was 40, by the way, because back then, if you weren't spurting blood, no one really bothered with you. And I thought I had just fallen hard, and that was it. So these layers of problems made it very difficult for me to feel any sort of pleasure in my life because of depression, anxiety, and brain fog. But also, I had a really hard time functioning. And I have dyslexia as well. That's another layer of challenge. So how I came to this journey was I was so miserable and so challenged that I thought to myself, if I don't figure out some way to make this better, I'm not so sure I want to be around. And I had to struggle with thoughts of suicide for many years because I was so miserable. It's not like I was miserable some of the time. I was miserable almost all the time. I had trouble sleeping. I had trouble focusing. I had trouble with chronic pain in my body. And of course, depression and anxiety are actually considered chronic pain conditions, by the way. So I, came to this point very early on in my life. I think I was about 20 years old when I said, I've got to find something to change this sense of, my life or an experience of my life, or I'm not going to make it because this isn't worth it. And I was very passionate about that because I didn't want to give up, but I was like, this, if life is going to be this hard, this painful, without, any breaks or pleasure, then, I'm going to think about getting out of here. So that was the drive. And this is part of what I want to talk about right now is that you really need to have a really strong reason why you want to get better, because getting better takes tremendous fortitude. And, I would like to tell you that there's a quick and easy way, 3 easy steps to overcoming chronic pain and illness and depression or all these other challenging things I overcame. But that's not honest. What is true is that first I had to make the commitment, and then being willing to sort through who knows, thousands of different approaches. That's what it feels like. I think that's pretty accurate in a sense. But before I figured out what worked, and the chart behind me here, that's the polyvagal theory that I created a chart for. The reason I went through all that trouble is because after almost 35 years of hitting my head against the wall, trying to figure out how to turn things around for me, that theory gave me a pathway that showed me the way. And that was almost 6 years ago when I discovered it, the polyvagal theory. And by following its principles, I actually got better, and I am better, and it stayed better for the first time in my life. So that's how I got to polyvagal theory. So it was years of trying things earnestly, having some of them work for reasons I didn't understand half the time. Other things didn't work for reasons I didn't understand, because they were like standard things, like, meditation, that's what you should do if you have these problems, or special diets will cure this or that. And I found out those things to be partially true, but my problem I had was there was no way to kind of have an overview of, okay, if I'm feeling this way, I can do this and get better, because it would seem so random. And one thing I can say about the healing journey is it's a multi-dimensional, multifaceted journey. So what people don't get, because of how modern medicine is structured, which is a very binary sort of, you break your leg, you need a cast. Fine, if that's all that's wrong with you. But when you have complex issues like I do, you need multi-pronged approach. Because basically the way that health works is that if there's certain elements that are not in place. Like for me, I had celiac disease and didn't know it. That was a problem. I had a traumatic brain injury and didn't know it. That was a problem, because those are blank spots in my knowledge that really affected how things worked or didn't work. And so it was through this getting a clearer vision of how things interrelate, which is polyvagal theory, I was able to say, oh, I see. When you have a traumatic brain injury, you have to heal that aspects of that before your digestion works. For example, if your digestion doesn't work, you can't feel good, because that's where most of the serotonin comes from in your gut. Is that's the serotonin production mostly, and vice versa. If you have foods that upset your stomach, like gluten, for me, they scramble your brain. So I had a scrambled brain already. I had a gut that was sensitive to lots of foods. And so that was another piece. And then, of course, the other huge piece that I learned from polyvagal theory was that social connections are one of the most important parts of your wellness. And that narrative had never been strong in my world, because the scientific community, even many psychological approaches, all say about, well, it's your responsibility to get, to be happy or to get well. And I'm not completely rejecting that. But what I learned from polyvagal theory is that secure social connections are what actually create a sense of safety in your body and your physiology, which then helps you feel different emotionally instead of the other way around. So my journey has been a long kind of slog of sorting out what things I have been told that actually aren't true or only partially true, and things that actually are true, because when I do them, it actually works for me.